you just raise your hand and ask me a question and I can write it down, or if you are not sure how it is written down, or just tell me and I will write it down. Perhaps for the first initially I have to introduce myself. So I'm just only a year and a half as I'm a graduate of Minsk State Linguistic University. I also work partially with logistics now. I'm a translator in a big company that sells spare parts, and so I'm dealing with invoices all the time. So I do understand what it is all about. So actually my life experience is not so big, but I was very happy to have such a great both spiritual lifetime experience visiting the United Kingdom, and I'm going to tell you how it all happened to be, because for me it's also one of the evidence of the great role of Metropolitan Antony in history of the church, or the evidence of his the greatness of his figure. Although such people, they do not need evidence. You just see his eyes, or read his books, or just hear a quote somewhere on Facebook. Like people, they like posting quotes without any context. So, and I'm sorry if I'm talking too sophisticated, too. Я извиняюсь, если я говорю слишком мудрено. Well, just make a sign if you do not understand anything, okay? So here we have videos. This is the folder that I'm going to show you, the photos from the exhibition, but I'm not sure how shall I.
The remote control.
Remote control.
It's here on the table.
On the table, okay. Actually, Metropolitan Antony was never late on his sermons, as he appreciated the time of the listeners. I'm not so yet so pious as Metropolitan Antony, and everything is a bit in a mess because I don't know how to deal with these folders. Let's try.
I've got arrows there, and you can.
Well, I'm trying.
Doesn't work.
What about the battery? Is it?
Пожелать можно, да?
So first we need this folder. Thank you. So this is the poster of the exhibition itself, and then you will see the extracts. Well, actually it was like the posters of this format, 20 of them, just for us to be easier. I'll show it like this way. So this exhibition, why do our meeting has the title Encounter the Six Lessons? Because in general it is difficult to describe anyone's life well as a scheme, but if you'd like to tell somebody about it, you have to do this. And for this exhibition it was made like the whole life of Metropolitan Antony was described in those 6 lessons. And so the first lesson is a lesson of encounter, and perhaps this is the main lesson of the whole story of Metropolitan Antony. And here we see one of the most important quotes of him saying, perhaps this is the central one, and it is the central for the whole story. So encounter, встреча. An encounter is always a joy, because every encounter comes from God, because every encounter is a moment when people found themselves facing one another, sometimes for a very short time, and yet for eternity. As each time we meet with our hearts, faith, love, common hope, under the sign of the common cross, under the light of the forthcoming resurrection, separation is not possible any longer. Distances on earth do not separate people anymore. Я думаю, что очень важно это прочитать на русском языке, чтобы все поняли, потому что это центральная мысль, которая будет на протяжении всей нашей встречи, чтобы действительно это было понятно. Эта фраза была сказана в контексте, когда в Советском Союзе, когда посещал его митрополит Антоний, у него было очень мало времени, ему нельзя было говорить длинные речи, потому что КГБ вокруг. У него были очень сжатые сроки на проповедь, и он должен был сказать самое основное людям, которые видят его, возможно, действительно первый и последний раз в жизни. Господь нам дал сегодня встретиться. Встреча всегда радость, потому что всякая встреча от Бога. Потому что всякая встреча – это мгновение, когда люди оказываются лицом к лицу, иногда на очень короткое мгновение, а вместе с тем и навсегда. Ибо, раз встретившись сердцем, верой, любовью, общей надеждой, под сенью общего креста, под сиянием общего грядущего победного воскресения, уже расстаться нельзя. Расстояние земли и людей не разлучает. And so today we also have an encounter. And each time when I was leading the tours around the exhibition, I was trying to focus on these things that now we face each other and perhaps we won't see each other anymore, any longer, but let us meet each other and meet Christ. And so the first lesson, the lesson of encounter. And, oh, I'm sorry, So then, you know, the order of the photos is a bit different, but still, let's try. So this is the 15-year-old Andrei Bloom. This is the actual name of Metropolitan Antony. He was born in a family of a Russian diplomat. Bloom is a Nordic surname. Because the ancestors of Andrei, they came from Sweden, if I'm not mistaken, many years ago, and then it was like a dynasty of diplomats in Russia. And so he was born in 1914, the year when the First World War started. And his I'm sorry, because you know the order of the photos is skipping, and it makes little sense actually in my photos, but still. Okay, let's do it then this way. I'll show you the photos from the book. It would be less. Then we'll just see all the photos at the end. Well, just to make sure that you would see the favorite photos. Okay, so this is the first photo that we see here. So this is the father, Boris Bloom, and little Andrei. He's about 3 years old here, perhaps. And so these are his parents, both young, and his mother actually she was a sister of the famous composer Scriabin. Although later on, Metropolitan Antony, he didn't like to talk a lot about his family. First of all, he didn't like to be associated with the famous family, and well, he was a person of his own. But anyway, the other reason was that Scriabin, the composer, he was very experimental and in his music, and he strived also to reach some mystical, spiritual depths in his music, and he died very young, and so this is kind of a very mysterious story, and Metropolitan Anthony so as not to judge his uncle. He preferred not to speak a lot about it, but anyway, when he visited Moscow later on, he always visited his nieces and nephews there. And so the life of little Andrei starts in Persia, Persia. And he was like a little prince there, Arabic, like in Arabic Nights, Тысяча одна ночь. So here is like the typical dinner there with lots of people, with servants. Also, he was only 4 or 5 years old when he had the riding classes. Наездником был. And also he had his own donkey, осел, and his own lamb, so as a toy. So, but then the revolution broke, and it meant that his father lost his job, and then his parents, they had to travel all alone. Well, just imagine. So Persia is the Asian country. Then they tried to move to India, and he remembers all the mess that was there. Then they traveled across the sea to Spain, and during the journey, the parents, they had to hire some villains, разбойники, so as to guard them, to protect them. But for a little boy, 5-year-old boy, he wished more adventures. He wished them to be seized by pirates. However, it didn't happen, but there were, lots of misfortunes anyway, because they were when they were in Gibraltar, they were heading for the British Isles, and then something went wrong. They embarked there. And the ship, it went to Britain with all their belongings on board. So the little boy lost his suitcase, and you can imagine what a 5-year-old boy could put into this suitcase. Perhaps a teddy bear, some books to read, and he lost all of this. Perhaps all the required minimum for life of this 5-year-old boy. And then later on, half a century later, when he was already metropolitan, some people from Scotland found him and contacted him and said, we have a suitcase that you lost when you was 5-year-old boy. And then he opened it and he saw all those treasures. And however, it was a lesson for him also, how we do cherish and treasure the things that we have now, but later on we see that they are not of such a value for us. Well, we may look upon everything what we have in life in such a way. What if all those things were taken from us? And actually, the immigrants of this time, they felt like they've lost everything. Not just their suitcases, but also their country, their history, their position, their social position. And his parents, although they were very high in this social structure in the pre-revolutionary Russia, and when they finally went to France, they also had a chance to strive in the life. For example, the father of Andrei, Boris, he was an apt Orientalist. He knew lots of languages. He knew Arabian, and he could earn a lot as a translator. But the immigrants of the time, they felt like the aristocrats. They felt that it was their personal responsibility for the revolution, for what happened, because they were too far from the common people. And so his father chosen not to live with his family, not to live with his wife and wife's mother and his son, but he chosen the simplest jobs. He was perhaps the simplest ones, how to describe it concisely, but still So he saw people only on Sundays, and he also put a sign on his door, please do not knock, I will hear but I will not open. Anyway, he met his son on Sundays, and for little Andrei it was kind of a nonsense. Why does it happen in this way? But it was a kind of ascetics, an ascetic life. So his father, he was said to be just praying all the other time. And so this is the photo of the actual family. So at the time, they had in France, in Paris, they had no possessions even to live together. And so they had to send Andrei to a boarding school. So the school where pupils, they just live on the premises. And first of all, before that, they spent a year in Austria. And so first he learned German. He spoke Russian, and then he learned German. And there was the first lesson of freedom happened in Andrei's life in Vienna. So one day when he was in school, the children, they were asked to write an essay. Who do you like to be? And children, they of course they wrote like, I'd like to be an engineer, I'd like to be a doctor, I'd like to be a teacher. And Andrei, the day before that, he went to the zoo. And he was so impressed by monkeys that he decided to write an essay, I'd like to be a monkey, with illustrations. And he thought it was a very creative way to make this essay. Next day, when he came to school, and he just was sitting very impatiently and just, well, when the teacher will praise him, he said, Andrei, Bloom. He got up, he said, well, come, stand in front of the class. He went and he stood. And then she said, well, you know, only a Russian barbarian could do such a thing as to write that we all should return to our roots. And so he was devastated. To say that he was upset is to say nothing. And later on, he would recall this situation as a lesson of accepting others' freedom. So we should not expect others people to behave as we'd like them to behave. They have a right to be creative and to see life in their way. They have a right to wish to become a monkey. This is very important in understanding of Andrei and the future Antony's story. So in this boarding school in Paris, he was more than unhappy, because it was a school in the very slums, трущобы, of Paris. Well, you know, the situation was that nowadays, with this war in Syria alone, in Europe, we have 1 million of immigrants. At those times, interwar times, there were 3 million immigrants in Europe. And so Russians and you know, all people of Slavic descent, Slavic origin, you know, they were treated even worse than Syrian and people of Arabic origin nowadays. And so in those Parisian slums, little Andrei was beaten every day so severely that later on, after the war, when he was already a metropolitan, you know, a man of height, of physical strength, fearless, who just lived through the war with the Nazis, when he was riding a metro in Paris, and when he stopped on the station where he used to go out to get to his school, he fainted. Just at one sign, well, that this is this stop. He just fainted, упал в обморок. Because such miserable his experience was. And he said that I can be grateful to all those children only for not killing me. And he said that at the time he just learned that the world is like jungle, and that all people, regardless of their age, regardless whether these are boys or girls, men or women, grannies or just old men, they're all bearing all those, they're all dangerous. And he felt like he was a young wolf and he had to struggle. And he to struggle in the name of his mother and his granny. And he was hiding the bruises, синяки, so as not to upset them. And then one day, his mother got a new job, high-paid job, and they moved to a separate room of theirs, not even a flat, a separate room. And so they took him from this terrible school. He was brought to to some college, and so they lived together finally. And he said that for the 2 weeks, for the first time in his life, he was absolutely happy. It was like, the endless happiness. And then he felt very, very upset, because he felt that his life has no sense. He has nothing to struggle with. And he made a decision that if in a year he would not find a sense of his life, he would commit a suicide. Что он сведет счеты жизни. And as of his religious life, we should say that he was not at all religious at the moment. He was 14 then. When his granny, of course, she tried to read him some stories he knew of Christ. But as he saw, for example, Catholics, for him, these were those children in this terrible school. And so he hated Catholics. When his granny brought him to the church once a year on Easter night, he just felt that when he steps inside the church, when he inhales the incense, he faints, like many children do. And so he just understood that this is a trick that works. When he inhales the incense, he faints, and Granny took him out of the church. And so he just made this trick every year so as to avoid this, a terrible, terrible thing to do. And for him, what was more important is the camp, like a scout camp, but it was called Vitezi. So where children, they had this patriotic training, when they were trained how to survive, not so in the countryside, and how to return to Russia one day and to fight with Bolsheviks. And he felt like that this is what was like a religion for him. And Christianity and Orthodoxy was kind of something additional, like bonus option, a part of nationalistic feeling. But there he met a priest, Georgy Shumkin. It was a man of complex life, because actually he was a binge drinker, and so he was not a saint. But what all the children saw is this unexplainable and unconditional love. It seemed that he was not like a very kind, this man who will just tell you all the good things to do. Not like a granny that well, not like women can be so kind or so
sweet.
so sweet, yes, but still he had this feeling of, they had this feeling of love, and they didn't understand why, because they were not, they always disobeyed, and they were not behaving well, but still they felt that they were loved. And it was like the first lesson of Christianity. And later on, when Andrew became Anthony, and when he was consecrated as bishop, he was always inviting Father Georgi, when he was alive, well, to be present, because for him this was the first teacher of real Christianity, the Christianity of love. And so one day, Andrei was playing volleyball, and we have to say that he was a keen volleyball player throughout his life. And also there are some journals of interwar volleyball matches, and there are all the scores and how many all the statistics where did he of all the matches, volleyball matches where he took place, when he participated. And so there he was, this 14-year-old boy, a volleyball player, not very religious, a rebellious, we would say. And then a teacher comes and says, you know, guys, we have a priest here. Could you please go and listen to him? They said, what? He'd like to play volleyball. No priests, no Christianity, no orthodoxy. I said, you know, guys, when he will return to Paris, he would tell everybody that you were not behaving. So please, I'm not asking you to listen to him. We'll just sit somewhere in the corner and pretend to be listening. Okay. They went, they sat in the corner, and they were just trying to mind their own business, but the priest was talking so loud. And so Andrei, he just heard those words like, you should be meek and humble, you should love your enemies, you should forgive their trespasses. And he said, and he thought, what? I shall love my enemies? I shall love all those terrible children from this terrible school, to whom I grateful only for the thing that they did not kill me. And when he returned home, he just asked his granny to give him a Bible, a gospel, and he decided that he would find out whether all those things whether all those things they are in this gospel. And he just tried, well, 4 gospels, which is the shortest one, okay, according to Mark. And he would say that this gospel according to Mark was the best one for such rebels as him, because there is, little descriptions, a few descriptions, and just action. And he started started reading, and he suddenly felt that someone was in the room. Perhaps it was Granny? No, nobody. And he just, this sequence of thoughts. If it's not Granny, then it's Christ. Then he really exists. Then it means that he resurrected. It means that God loves us, that he came here, and he loves everyone, both sinners and pious people. And it means that I shall love everyone. And it was, this turning point in his life. And later on, as he became a doctor, he would say that I understand when people are, have this kind of mental disorder. If it was this kind of, some mental thing, I would not be, I would not be sane anymore. So it means that it was a real thing that happened to me. But and he felt that from this very moment he has to share this experience with others. this experience of encounter, although it was very personal and he could not give any evidence to other people, anything, because it was only him who felt it. He had no image, no photo of Christ, no auto, or no signature of Christ, nothing. He had only this feeling, and he had to share it with others. And for everybody, for everyone else around him, it was a very, very strange change, because this volleyball player, this young rebel, suddenly he looks at you in such a way and tells you, "Have you heard that Christ has risen?" And when he was riding the metro in the morning, going to school, and he saw, this kind of this morning transport phase. I'm going to work, and he felt like people, they're so gloomy, as if they never heard of Christ, as if they have never heard of resurrection and of the life eternal. And he would just sit closer to them and say, "Have you heard? Have you heard that Christ has risen?" People thought that he was mad, but for him it was very, very important. And as he says that perhaps not so religious people, where they can meet on the this is the common ground. This how would they say, the humanistic point, that that's an illusion that we have, that the church is like in those medieval times, that ascetics and people, they're deprived of all the joy in their life. It's not so. God loves people, and God wants people to love each other and to enjoy themselves in this true joy of the communion with God, and in communion with each other in the presence of God. So, and this is the common ground for all the conversations between the religious people and not so religious people, or even atheists. Also there were funny stories. So here we see Sergeyevich Averintsev, one of the famous philologists and translators from some ancient and Asian. For example, he translated from Syrian some very rare and books of the Holy Fathers. And in his circles, so in the circles of his friends, he would know that Metropolitan Antony comes to Moscow. When his telephone rang, he would hold the receiver, and they would say, "He arrived. He has arrived," and everybody knew that it was Metropolitan Antony. Would put down the receiver. He would, and the other thing, "He has arrived. Meet at Nikola." It was Nikola. It was Saint Nicholas Church, and so Sergei Sergeyevich would put down the receiver. He would go to the nearest tramway, and he would ask the driver, "Does this tramway goes to Nikola?" And then the whole tramway would turn and say, "Sergei Sergeyevich, we are all going there." And then crowds of people would just stand there as a tinned fish in this small church, and Metropolitan Antony would say his short 7 to 10 minutes sermons, and the book of his Russian sermons, well, actually not only Russian, he was also in Minsk and other towns of the former Soviet Union. And so these sermons are considered to be the strongest one, because he had to tell very concisely in this very 10 minutes, well, the gist of his faith, as in the very first quote on encounter. And then he would just say that come and kiss the cross, and I will give you blessing. And everybody was just, like in Soviet Union, when everybody has to stand in a queue to get some things, They said, okay, I cannot get the blessing. He will come somewhere there. The people would start, pushing, elbowing each other. And he said, oh, keep calm. I would not leave this place. I will be here until the very last parishioner would come and get the blessing. And then he sees that one small babushka, as they call it in Britain, babushkas. She would come one time to pick the ball, another, third time, fourth time, and he already sees her heading for the fourth time. He said, my dear one, why should you go and get the blessing for the fourth time? He thought perhaps she has some problems with her memory. You have already received it for 3 times. Oh, Father Anthony, it's so nice to get a blessing from you. I would like to get it more and more and more. So this was this. And also people would gather on some flats, have some kvartirniki, and people were just sitting, as on those photos from the 80s, because in 80s it was already allowed to gather on the flats, and earlier they would not even tell each other that they were going to the same place. They would somehow discuss it beforehand, and people, those who were copying the books, on the typewriting machine or in handwriting, they knew that they could be just arrested any time if those books were found in the flats. And also some people they recall that, for example, the director of a documentary, Apostle Любви, Valentina Matveeva, she said that in 80s, when she was diagnosed with cancer, she decided to get baptism, and she asked people for some books, some Christian books, and they gave her just one small book of the speeches and sermons of Metropolitan Anthony. And later on, she went to Britain, and she made this documentary about him. And actually, she recovered from cancer. So perhaps it was like, we cannot say that. Perhaps later on, it would be one of the reasons, or one of the evidence that Metropolitan Anthony was a saint. Though for many people he is already a saint, and he was also regarded as a saint during his life. And when in London, one of the women in his parish, she would stay very close to him, and each time when he was reading his name during the sermon, during the Proskonidia, for example, or for some other reason, she would make this low bow just to show him her praise, and he would say to her, please come somewhere in the rear part of the church. I would not like to see you here each time when you are just praying on me. And as he was had a very attractive personality, and some people, they would get very dependent on him. They would come to him to ask him for a small thing, for the smallest things. And as he was very gifted in seeing people, in meeting them, and everyone who met him even once in his or her own life, they would recall it as a very special, a very intimate encounter, as if he was seeing them, as he was looking through them, as if he knew all their secret thoughts, and he was always he had this gift to find the right words. And some people, they would for example, they had some mental disorders and they would recover from them. But anyway, and also people would recall that he very often he would he would be mistaken in people. He would take people for the good ones, and then he would discover that they were doing very bad things. Anyway, anytime he just found out that people were getting too dependent with him, he would just close his door in front of them, or not just in front of them, but he would put a sign like his father did, like I'm not home, I'm not at home, sorry. And it was not a cruel thing to do. It was a very just thing to do, because also he recalled later on that if I was dead, people would listen to my sermons, but not just look at me. And it is very important to understand that throughout his life he was not like perceiving himself also as a superstar, although other people perceived him in such a way. He was always very self-conscious, that he said that when you understand that I speak very well of your sins, please remember that I'm talking about my own sins. So that is why I can speak well of them. So he was very conscious of his personality, that he's still also a fellow Christian. And for him it was very important that a priest is not the one who had the powers over his parishioners, but to be a priest means to serve people. And actually, well, to tell you the truth, at the very end of Metropolitan Antony's life, at the beginning of the 2000, 2002, 2003, when it was, the new wave of immigrants in the 90s came to London, and also new wave of priests of the new breed. There was a kind of a conflict, because Metropolitan Antony, he was very creative in his perception of the church life, and he would tell people it is more important to be deeper in your prayer than to perhaps to remember how many times you shall bow, or to where to put your candle. All those things, those small things, they are important, but they are no more important than the prayer and the living example. Anyway, he suffered a lot from also misunderstanding of some of his teachings, and not even teachings, but his opinions. And it is very important also to understand that his legacy as a preacher is wide and very deep. But for example, in the series of his last talks on doubt and questioning, о сомнении и вопрошании, which were actually translated as уверенность в вещах невидимых. So we see the difference, that in English it is called like on doubt, о сомнении, and here we see in Russian уверенность. But actually this is not a mistake, because he tells about this how to question the things that you believe in a right way, so as to believe more. And on the beginning of his talks, these are not the easiest talks to read and to talk about, and the topics are not so easy to talk about, but he begins them that this is just an opinion of mine, and I'm not pushing it, because actually he was not a theologian. He didn't have a theologian education. He was just, inept reader and inept speaker and inept thinker. So all those things we shall remember them. So he was a complex person. Sometimes we shall question some facts of his life too. We shall not just be blindly guided by his personality. And he himself, he insisted on this throughout his life. But anyway, we can. But on the other, this is all truth. But on the other hand, it is also true that he gave us an example of real Christian life. Well, also one of the examples that he lived. When people they came to London, sometimes they were asking, "Where is the metropolis? Где метрополия? Where is the metropolitan?" And people would say, "No, this small room behind, somewhere behind the church. This is the metropolis." And he was living just in a small room with a gas cooker, with a bed, with some case for his belongings, and he had even no central heating in his room.
Может, мы уже немножко перейдем дальше, потому что уже не воспринимает.
Okay. So I'm just.
Proposal to meet one more. Еще раз, one more meeting.
To continue this topic.
Because
Okay.
it's become tiring.
I'm sorry. For me.
Very interesting.
But actually, I'm going to the conclusion. So and the exhibition itself, it ends. So there are 6 chapters and 6. And each of them starts with a photo where Metropolitan Antony faces the viewers. And at the very end, he just facing somewhere, not us, but somewhere else. And it means